Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh is brought to you by
Mary Freebed, Collectible Insurance Services, Air Call Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Calder Financial, Grand Management Group, Rite Aid Investments, Encore Business Group, Jim Hegland of JH Realty, Williams Chiropractic, and iCore.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh airs live Monday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern on Jethro.fm. Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh.
Stay informed and stay vigilant. Glad you could join us here. We got a little bit more light today. It seemed like it was lighter a little bit later. I know we're supposed to gain like an hour or so in the next month or so that's good for people. It's still dark here in outside in the studio, but Mike's keeping me company here. MLB Mike's on the board, and Mom's in studio with us. It's National Hot Tea Day. I don't know how much interest I'll have from the guests and from Mike. I don't know if Mike's a tea drinker here.
I'm not going to help you a bit.
I kind of saw that one coming. I saw that one coming, but I've got two different teas. One's hot here on the desk, so I drink tea every day. So if we do hit somebody that drinks tea, maybe we'll engage them in conversation. But we've got our first guest lined up right away. She wanted to come in and start the show with us here. So we've got Emily Waldon of Baseball America. Maybe she's a tea drinker. She does a lot of writing. I'm sure she keeps long hours. She's got to keep up with the teams here. So Emily, do you drink any tea for National Hot Tea Day?
So when it comes to my caffeine of choice, I'm definitely a coffee girl, but I do like a hot peppermint tea when I get the chance.
That's a good one. So I have two different teas that I drink every day. My friends think I'm a little insane for this, but I put 4 tea bags in each tea. So they're different flavors, but it's basically 2 cups of 4 tea bags, and one of them has a peppermint in there. One's a peppermint green tea, so I like that. That's in my mint cup. But coffee's a little bit more accessible. It's easier. It's probably in the different places where you go. Like if you're writing in the press box, it's probably a little easier to get that than to be sipping tea and have a little ladle there and have your pinky up.
Yeah, it's more like chug the coffee and go. So.
That's more of a volume kind of thing. You're able to, just get it going that way. But I'm excited to talk with you here. We've been trying to get you on for a little while. Been busy here through the holidays, but I wanted to talk with you about your experience at the Fall League and kind of do a little bit of a preview of the minor leagues going into the year. Talk about kind of the end of last year, because obviously the Whitecaps were named the top organization. That was big news. I was looking at your X account, and there was a couple things that were not baseball related that I wanted to point out. I like that at one point you were jamming to Nickelback riding around. I didn't have you doing that. Is that your music of choice? What do you like to jam to, either when you're riding or when you're in the car?
It really depends on my mood. In all honesty, I will be honest, and I hate to break Nickelback fans' hearts, but I wouldn't say I'm a Nickelback fan per se, but there's something about that song that a number of players have gotten me hooked on it because they use it as one of their hype songs. And it just seemed like a good song while I was trying to survive driving in a snowstorm, so I gave it a go.
This is giving me a good transition here. What would Emily Waldon's walk-up song be?
Oh, gosh. I'm just going to go with that song, Burn It to the Ground.
It's a good one. I think that was the theme for one of the WWE weekly wrestling shows for a while. It's got kind of that mood. It's intense. That would be a good walk up. I was curious if you would go, because there's a couple different directions you can go. I listen to a lot of the walk up music. I like walk up music. We've talked walk up music with your friend and mine, VP of the Whitecaps, Jim Jarecki, because he has his walk up song song listed on the website, and I thought that was interesting. And so we've talked about walk-up music a little bit, but I like both directions. I like the intense ones like that, and I like when someone throws a total curveball where it's like a very light song, like it's like a classical song, or a kid, or when they did Baby Shark, like something like that. Like I like when they kind of zig left when everybody else is going right.
Yeah, it's definitely a personal preference thing. And like I said, too, it really depends on my mood. There's times where I like more of the easygoing stuff. But if I'm working out or, if it's more at a venue or something, the harder stuff tends to go over better.
So you might be one of those that changes the song somewhat often then, depending on your mood. I mean, it's a long season. You might need a different song down the stretch than you did at the beginning of the season.
Oh, for sure. And obviously in baseball, there's some superstition. So if I'm doing well with one walk-up song, I might hold on to it for a little while.
Exactly. That's what it's all about. So yeah, that's interesting. I do like that choice. I think when I have baseball guests on, that might be a good introductory question for them, because I'd be curious to develop a roster of walk-up songs. I've always wanted to delve more into that on the show eventually here, but we've got to delve into the Whitecaps and the Tigers minor leagues as a whole here. I was looking at some of your recent writing, and so we've got a lot of different directions to go, but I wanted to start out with Fall League because that's the main thing that we were wanting to talk about here, and just get some of your takes, what stuck out to you, how it went for you, for the organization, and we'll kind of start there.
Yeah, it's always a good time going out there. There's a lot of faces that I don't get to see regularly throughout the year, so it's a little bit of a family reunion of sorts when you get out to Arizona, because everybody's out there. So you get to see a lot of people from different clubs. Obviously getting a chance to connect with the Tigers minor league guys, caught up with them for a little bit. Some of them are in Arizona for the first time, some of the players I talked to. So got to talk about climate change, and how that affects your overall performance, especially if you're not used to the dry versus the humidity. So definitely a great time. I really enjoyed it out there.
Tell me a little bit more about that. So what are kind of the substantive changes with, I know what you're talking about, but what were they feeling? What have you seen over the years? What are some of the kind of aggregated thoughts on the different, because whether we did this with, I think with one of the guys at Minor League Report, he was doing stadium reports, and we were talking about the weather a lot at the beginning of the year last year, because obviously, especially in Detroit and Michigan, we've got some questionable weather at the beginning of the major league season because of the timing. I was at one of the first games of the Tigers season a few years ago, and it was snowing at that game. That's not uncommon. So tell me about kind of that heat versus what we can see up here in Michigan, starting the year in the snow, and then obviously it gets warmer as the season goes on.
Yeah, I would say it's more, from what I've noticed, it's more about dry versus humid. Because the ball is definitely going to carry different. A lot of guys have said in those more humid environments, it's harder to confidently grip the ball because you've got so much moisture everywhere. Whereas if you go out to Arizona, it's completely different. So as a pitcher, you kind of have to reapproach how you're going to deliver the ball. And then as a hitter, the ball just carries different. So I think it's just a matter of getting a few reps, kind of seeing how that ball carries, getting used to that atmosphere, and then that's going to help you maximize based on your skill set.
That's an interesting concept, especially for the guys that play in the colder weather climates, because they're not necessarily experiencing that as much, and they have to wait for that. You're saying humid versus dry, but wait for those weather implements to come across as the year goes on, but it probably would help them obviously with road trips because there's a lot of different factors that factor into home road advantage, but that's probably one that's not talked about as much. You talk about the crowd, you talk about, being comfortable and being in your own schedule when you're at home, but obviously, it's talked about more when, say, teams go to Colorado or something that's a stark contrast, but Arizona and some of the other differing climates around the country, I'm sure, have different attributes depending on what time of year you go, and I'm sure the players and organizations as a whole kind of scout that.
Well, and you have the guys who grow up in certain environments and they actually don't like those environments. I spoke with Max Clark about that, who he's originally born and raised in Indiana, so he's a Midwest kid. He understands Midwest weather. He hates being cold. I gave him a hard time about it. I said, aren't you used to this weather? He goes, I'm used to it. Doesn't mean I have to like it. So it's something where it's definitely personal preference. Carlos Licorica, who was a relief pitcher for West Michigan this year, he's from Miami. So that is obviously the humidity capital of the country. And coming to West Michigan, he absolutely loved it. He does not like humidity. So being in West Michigan during the spring and summer, which we know is, just a beautiful time of year, and then being out in Arizona, getting a chance to be out there in fall league and get some reps, he loved it. So it definitely comes down to personal preference, but I think as an athlete, you have to learn to adapt to your surroundings just because you're going to see different environments everywhere you go.
Hopefully those other factors that I know Max, it seems like Max is fairly happy where he's at, and I know he's a big part of obviously the organization as a whole and kind of the team culture at the levels he's been at, but hopefully that other stuff overrides the weather so that once it's a ways off, but once he has to decide what weather he gets to live in, hopefully he grows into the Michigan weather by then.
Oh, he's absolutely happy where he's at. It was more good-natured, kind of ribbing about it. But he's not a fan of the cold, but he's extremely happy being with the Tigers.
I know you've had several talks with Max. He's an interesting kid. He's obviously one of the top prospects in the system, but his personality, watching the three guys that have been grouped together a lot, Clark, Briseño, and McGonigal, they all have very different personalities from what I've seen. You know them a lot better than I do, but especially McGonigal and Clark, it seems like they're kind of almost like the odd couple as far as personalities that are kind of opposed to each other, not necessarily that similar, but they seem to get along very well and play off each other well, both in the micro of what seems to be their relationship, but the macro of the organization as a whole.
Oh, 1,000%. They have so much respect for each other, and they'll be the first to agree. They couldn't be more different, but it's in that they've learned where their differences complement each other. They're both very secure in who they are. They've embraced what they bring to the game, and I think it just makes them that much more confident, but absolutely they love each other and they get along extremely well.
I know they've made a lot of references to it in interviews and such too, talking about, I think Max made a comment at one point that Kevin McGonigal is his favorite hitter or something like that. And I think they see things in the other that they kind of recognize that maybe isn't part of them, but they can appreciate about the other person. And they're both great talents. They do it a different way, but it seems like they'll both, obviously it's a little bit off, but they'll both, I think, fit into whatever team format they get into. They both seem like very good clubhouse guys in their own right, whereas Max seems like more of the life of the party kind of guy and more main character vibes out of him, and McGonigal's more of like the keep his head down, quiet, steady leadership kind of guy.
Well, and as an athlete, too, I think if you're not looking for things to learn from your teammates, I don't think you see the same success. And so I think they found a really good rhythm of finding little things that they can take away and apply to their own development. And like I said, they're very confident in who they are, but that mutual respect they have for each other, they're constantly picking each other's brains. And Max will tell you Kevin McGonigal is his favorite baseball player.
That's great. Well, and like you said, I mean, especially at that age and for their development, even though they are great prospects, top-rated prospects across the MLB landscape, they still have a lot of growth to do by nature of their age. And if they can add in pieces from a guy that is equally skilled or similarly skilled but in a different way, why not? I mean, you want to learn from people that a lot of the guys even on the Tigers side of things have said that moving their way up through the organization, and it's not just the Tigers, it's any organization. If you're, like you said, if you're not learning and you're not growing, it's one or the other. You're either growing or shrinking. There's not really a steady state. That's kind of an anomaly as far as you're usually trending one way or another.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. And these are all guys who have a very strong desire for growth, and they're not afraid to ask questions, and they're not afraid to push the limits. So they're all in a really good spot to pull the best out of each other.
It's a fun team. It's been fun to watch them move up. I'm sure your coverage kind of obviously got a part of them starting with the Whitecaps, and then they moved up, but then you got to cover new guys. But I want to dive into the Fall League a little bit more here and hear about some of the performances that stuck out to you while you're there. So stick with us. We'll come back with Emily Waldon of Baseball America. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Emily Waldon, talking a little minor league baseball here and Fall League. I know you said you got to reconnect with some people and connect with some of the guys about kind of different subject matters, but I'm curious about some of the performances there, who stuck out, who kind of caught your eye, and who you're looking forward to seeing more from this year as we kind of head into the minor league schedule here in a few months.
Yeah, as far as Tigers guys, didn't get to see many pitchers, unfortunately, in the time I was there. But hands down, the best hitter, as always, Kevin McGonigal. It's something that just kind of goes without saying, but very close second is Max Anderson, and I've been talking about Max Anderson for a number of years now. Very, very quiet production. If you meet him off the field, he's one of the most just soft-spoken, just really kind people, and he's definitely what you see is what you get with him. He doesn't put on any airs. He's not flashy. But he keeps it simple, but he performs and he can hit. And I think both Kevin and Max put on really an offensive show out there, got a lot of scouts' attention, and really put on a fun display for everybody.
Anderson is a name that I've been hearing. I've been following him too, not as much as you guys, but with all the reporting we get on the minor leagues and the focus we have on the minor leagues as a whole, that's a name that seems to be coming up a lot. I've even seen it now as a bit of a predictor for maybe he makes it up to the main level sooner rather than later. But he seems like a guy that's kind of flown under the radar for a while, but now that part now he's coming into form and basically impressing, seems like, pretty much everybody that's seeing him.
Yeah, and I would say he really kind of broke out between the 24 and 25 seasons because that was a chance for him to really find his groove offensively. And the biggest question really comes down to where the Tigers will put him defensively speaking. And that comes down to the bottleneck of infielders. They have more infielders than they know what to do with at this point. But they have shifted him over. He used to be a middle infielder, and they have shifted him over to play more at third. So based on who they want to have at third, that's likely where he's going to end up. And that's primarily because McGonigal, if you talk to scouts, McGonigal is a future second baseman. Obviously, that's the call of the Tigers where they want to put him long term. But as of right now, that's looking like what the plan's going to be.
Okay, that's interesting because I think the article that I was reading that referenced him potentially being called up to the main roster. Yeah, I think they were citing potential fixes at third there between Anderson and then Hyu Lee, who's another one that I've heard a lot of throughout talking to the different reporters from the minor leagues. That was a common name. It seemed like more so 2 seasons ago than last season. I wasn't hearing him as much last season once he went up to AAA.
Yeah, defensively speaking, Anderson will very likely end up at third, and that's because of his offensive success. And that comes down to, in my opinion, organizations will put you somewhere if you can hit. And Anderson was hitting the cover off the ball this past year. So as far as offensive output, I would definitely put Anderson down as a good next option based on who they want to call up for third.
It's nice that they have these guys coming. I mean, that obviously things churned here in the last couple years, but a lot of it is the prospects that they've been calling up, the young guys on the roster, and there's a huge wave of them coming. Who do you see kind of, obviously you've got the main 3 that you covered with the Whitecaps. Do you have any idea of what you see as kind of the trajectory for them? Do you see them continuing to get elevated together? What do you see being the path and pace for them?
I think it's a fun storyline to keep guys together, but I think as an organization, you have to look at the individual progress. Because not every player is going to be ready to move at the exact same time as someone else. So if I had to pick who would probably be next, I would go with McGonigal. And that's really because he's done everything that's been expected of him and then some on both sides of the ball. So I think he would probably be the most realistic option for a call-up.
It seems like one of the main things, obviously, when you call somebody up, you want them to be not only physically ready, but mentally ready. And that's where you get these guys that vacillate back and forth a little bit. McGonigal, you've talked to him and covered him a lot more than me. But if there's a guy that's mentally ready and seems very solid in his approach and that won't be bothered by the changes that happen when you join a major league team, it seems like that'd be Kevin McGonigal. He seems so steady and mature that he would be prepared for that, not only with what he's achieving on the field, but his off the field approach and steadiness. There wouldn't be I'm sure he'd have ups and downs like everybody, but it wouldn't be as volatile as maybe some other guys have been.
Oh, Kevin, nothing rattles Kevin. Kevin is very secure in himself, both as a person and as a competitor. And so I think him making that move to the majors would be pretty fluid. And like you said, there can be growing pains, and there's obviously learning experiences once you get to that level. But he's incredibly adaptable. He loves the challenge, and I think he's a great fit for consideration.
I'm excited to see some of these guys progress through the system. I'm curious. So you talk about McGonigal being first. Is that more so because of the things we're talking about, his maturation, but also a potential fit on the field up there versus Clark? Obviously, they've been trying to find outfielders in past years, but they've got a few in the mix at the major league level. I got to think he won't be too far behind because he's been progressing pretty well himself.
Yeah, honestly, defensively, it's ultimately going to be what the Tigers choose. But I think as far as overall development, that McGonigal would make the most sense for the next move.
Gotcha. So at the Whitecaps stage of things, obviously we don't know what the roster is going to be yet, but you probably have some inclination of who you expect to see there. You wrote a good article on Baseball America about them being the top organization, and you've had some mentions of Jarecki, who we mentioned earlier in the interview, and yeah, just a very well-run organization, and you've covered them very well. I'm curious what you're looking forward to with them here as the season hasn't gotten sussed out yet, but as it develops here, what are you looking forward to with covering the Whitecaps for another season here?
Yeah, I think it's just another round of watching what these guys pick up and how they apply it. Based on his recuperation, we could see Bryce Rayner in West Michigan before the end of the season. Obviously, he's dealing with rehabbing from an injury from last year, but I would say he's definitely the top prospect name that could come up to that level this year. So it's really just going to depend on how he's progressing. But a lot of other young potential talent. It's just going to come down to how the team is able to pull the best out of those guys like they did last season. And I think it should be a fun year for the guys.
They've certainly got the staff to do it and the organization to do it, because it's fun that we have them here in town. We'll be previewing them more as we get to the season here, because it's great to go there live. They've had, as you've been highlighting, a lot of great talent. So not only is the experience there, but the talent is the talent that you get to see on the field is great as well. But we appreciate you joining us to cover the Whitecaps and the minor leagues as a whole. Make sure to tell people where they can follow you as far as social media and whatever writing outlets you want to direct people to.
Writing at Baseball America right now, and then also at Just Baseball Media. They're another up-and-coming outlet that I've been able to contribute to. And then just my name, Emily C. Waldon, on Twitter or X, however you prefer to call it, and should be ramping up some more baseball coverage as the season gets closer.
We'll be looking forward to following you. She's a great follow. Be sure to follow her at those various outlets and on social media. And hopefully we'll have you on the show again here as we ramp up towards the season.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks again for having me.
No problem. Thanks, Emily. We'll talk to you soon. All right. Thanks to Emily Waldon. Appreciate her joining the show here. We're going to turn our attention to basketball after the break. We're going to have Robbie Bettelon of the Detroit Bad Boys on, and he's going to take us through his thoughts on the successful yet injury-riddled Pistons season here so far. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Happy to bring on this next guest. We've been cycling in some folks from Detroit Bad Boys. I like that publication. They do some great work covering the Pistons, and we cover the Pistons every week on the show. This has been a great season to do it because they've quietly been the top team in the East. They're still not really getting the recognition. I think that win over the Knicks helped. But fans of the show will also recognize why I like this guy, because a lot of his writing has a lot of automotive puns with covering the Pistons. So I like that. I like anybody that incorporates puns into their work. So happy to bring on Robbie Bettelon of the Detroit Bad Boys. And Robbie, I know you haven't been on the show before. We celebrate the thing of the day, and this one's kind of a niche thing here. It's National Hot Tea Day. I am a tea drinker, but I can't imagine you are. But hey, you can't make assumptions, because you know what happens when you make assumptions. So do you drink any tea, or what is your caffeine of choice?
I do not drink tea, unfortunately, but I will say my fiance does, and I feel like she offers me some chamomile tea maybe every other night. I'm worried about getting up in the middle of the night. I like my sleep, so I'm more of I'm a coffee drinker, just black coffee, put it in the Keurig, no creamer, no nothing, put some hair on your chest and start the day. So that is my go-to source of caffeine.
Well, I'm wondering, since she offers you chamomile tea specifically, is she trying to get you to calm down a little bit?
Yeah. Get to bed right away. Just once it hits 8:30, it's chamomile tea time. We got to start turning the lights down. Oh boy!
So that's going to be like soon after your appearance. You're going to have to wind down here, so we can't get you too riled up on the show.
Yeah. Luckily, I'm in Nashville, Tennessee currently, so I am in Central Time. I am no longer in Eastern time when I used to live in Michigan. So I at least got another hour.
Oh, phew. Okay. So it's not tea time for a little while. Okay.
Not yet.
Well, I'm excited that we can get you a little pumped up then, because the Pistons have been pumping me up all year here, because we cover them regardless of record or how they're playing, but it's been a great year to cover them. But it's just funny to me, the narrative on this team the whole year, because they've been, the further we go, they still stay atop the conference. They're knocking out most of the other teams in the league here. They're playing consistently very well with an inconsistent lineup. They had that whole stretch where they had some odd lineup constructions that I never would have been able to guess at the beginning of the year, and now they're kind of headed back into a period like that. But I'm curious how you take this season in so far, because it's like a lot of the examples on the court are showing that they're for real, but then all the talk is about, okay, well, who are they going to trade for? How are they going to improve? It's like, well, they're the top of the Eastern Conference, so I don't know how much they can improve. Doesn't mean you can improve, and I know they're a young team, but it's just funny that we're focused on improvement like they're at the bottom of the conference rather than the top team.
Yeah, if you would have reached out to me 2 years ago and asked me to come on, I would have been like, Ryan, are you sure you want to talk about the Pistons right now? But nowadays, I mean, it's crazy going into every game and assuming, like, you're expecting a win nowadays. And in my writing, I try to look for areas of improvement. And I totally think you're right that it's so interesting of, like, oh, the Pistons are still missing, like their second piece next to Cade, or, is it time officially to make a big swing at the trade deadline and go for it when, in reality, they're sitting at number one in the Eastern Conference. I think they're like 3 or 4 games above the Knicks and the Celtics right now. And you're totally correct. That game against the Knicks, was it, about a week ago, may have been like the best complete game that I have seen them play in years. So it is a very different spot to be in, but one that I have very much enjoyed, but I do not think that I have fully gotten used to it yet. So trying to enjoy every game along the season.
Exactly. Well, 2 years ago, I was still watching every game, which some of my friends would literally check on me and be like, really? You're watching every game?
Those are good friends, yeah.
Yeah, are you okay? But yeah, I'm loyal to my teams no matter what, and now especially covering from them for the show and everything, it's a necessity, but it's fun that they have been better here, and like you said, better in a fun and entertaining way. This is the type of team that we're used to as Detroit fans and people who cover the Detroit teams. They're the consummate grit type team. That's obviously been a Lions term, but all of the Pistons, that really started with the Pistons. You had the bad boys, you had the going to work group, and now I think we're closing in on a nickname for this team. I wasn't a fan. I loved the going to work group as a team. I really wasn't. The nickname just didn't seem to hit for me, and now we're closing in on the nickname here. So I'm not sure what you think of those two nicknames. You can't argue with the bad boys. That's what you're named after too, your publication.
That's the OG nickname. I was there in 2004, the going to work days. Me and my dad, gosh, I was maybe like in 5th grade or maybe middle school or something, but we went to that Game 5 against the Lakers together. So I will always have a place in my heart for the going to work teams. But I'm trying to think. I heard it was another Pistons podcast, maybe on Blue Sky, called them Back to Work, which I enjoyed as like a reference back to the glory days. And I will say I have very much enjoyed, the Lions' success kind of bleeding into like the other Detroit sports teams. Like, it does seem like the Pistons have kind of taken on that gritty, that like defensive, physical kind of mindset that the Lions have had. And really, I just think it's kind of like a city mindset, like just a Detroit mindset. And I think it was J.D. Bickerstaff who, back when we hired him last year, said that this team is going to like look like the city. It's going to embrace the city. It's going to play like the city. And he has fully manifested that. And they absolutely, I think only the Thunder are a better defensive team than them right now. So I will say it's so much better that the Pistons are good defensively than if they were to be good offensively. I think like it just makes that season so much more sweeter that they're doing it on the defensive end, like they used to do with the bad boys and like how they used to do with the going to work days.
That's one of the reasons why I'm I think more convinced than maybe some of the people that talk about it kind of on the national stage, or the people that look at the holes. I see the holes too, and there's holes in every team, no matter where you're at. You want to improve and make sure that you can try to fill those, especially if you are a team that's close to contention and that could kind of get you over the hump. The funny part about the talk with them improving, it's never really like, oh, well, this will make them a finals contender. It's like, this will make them in the hunt. I think they're in the hunt now. I don't know how everybody's math is, but it seems like they're in the hunt with the standings and everything. But I think that part of the reason it's the style that makes them contenders, because they don't have things that don't travel as well. Like if they were heavily dependent on outside shooting or different elements like that, then you'd go, okay, well, yeah, this could go flat in the playoffs. And then what do you have? Defense rarely goes flat. That's something that travels well to other buildings. They clearly like playing in these other environments and in New York. Like if they matched up against New York again, they would, I think, be up to the task. They clearly struggled with that a little bit, played at Madison Square Garden as a newer team, younger. They hadn't been to the playoffs. They'd had that vast improvement that you alluded to. So all of that, now it's different this year. I think they're a little bit more battle tested. And even though they're young, it seems like they're oriented to make a bit of a playoff run, and that's still maybe with a change. I'm not necessarily advocating no change, but I'm also not looking for a big swing either.
Yeah, I think that will be the talk of the next month or so leading up to the trade deadline. Is I think you have to make a swing. It just depends on how big of a swing. Are you bunting to get to first, or are you swinging for the fences? And I totally agree with you. So I was a high school math teacher back in the day. Also used to do some coaching at our high school, and we always used to tell our kids, like, we have to be the best at the things that we can control, and we could control the effort that we put into every game defensively. And I think that's exactly what the Pistons are doing. And, no matter where they're going to play, no matter where they're at, you know that they're going to bring it on the defensive end. Like JB Bickerstaff has done such a good job of instilling that culture. And then also, to Trajan's credit, I think he's acquiring the type of players who embody that as well. Like, I love that some of the guys call themselves the dog pound. Stu winning Eastern Conference Defensive Player of the Year. He should be a candidate, or of the month. He should be a candidate for Defensive Player of the Year. And I think one thing that has got to be so devastating for opposing teams is, hey, who's your best player? Well, Asar is going to be on him to start the game. Oh, Asar is coming off the bench? Well, we're going to put Ron Holland in, and good luck with Ron Holland at this point. There are so many point-of-attack defenders, people who are willing to guard you full court, that when you get to a playoff series that, could get 7 games, those are exactly the kind of guys that you want on the team, wearing those opposing stars down. You don't want them looking forward to the next matchup when they, are taking 36 minutes against Asar on defense. So I feel like I fluctuate day after day on what kind of a swing I want them to take, but I also feel like I can understand the vision based on whatever it is that Trajan wants to do.
I'm with you. I mean, there's definitely different levels to it, and I mean, it is kind of a wide open field to a degree. That was the talk at the beginning of the season, and I feel like this happens a lot in sports, where it's like the teams that were in the conversation kind of stay in the conversation for longer. We see this in say the college rankings. if you're ranked up high at the beginning of the season, it's harder for you to fall even if you're losing. Whereas if you have to stack some wins together if you're not a team that has that reputation. I'm an Indiana alum, so I saw this with my football team over the last couple of years. It took a while to get up to the top there. And so you kind of see that with the Pistons this year, because at the beginning of the season, we all could see the landscape on the Eastern Conference side of things. You had Halliburton out, the team that arguably would have won the finals had he been there for the full seventh game. You had Tatum out as well for the majority of the year. So now you're taking out two of the biggest contenders, and so now it's kind of wide open. You got a Knicks team that's maybe been run into the ground by Thibodeau, so you didn't know what was going to happen there. And then all these other teams got mentioned in the conversation. Okay, Orlando's making a move. Atlanta's making some moves. But since the Pistons didn't take that swing, they often didn't get included in the conversation. Now they find themselves at the top without making a big move. And I'm usually of the mindset of, hey, build up that young core, keep the culture, invest in that, and then kind of layer things in when you know you've got a solid core that won't be too far affected, and bring in a guy that you're pretty sure is a good culture fit. And I think that's obviously what they're going to look for, because as you mentioned, they're not necessarily needing to really reach too much. Like I see some of the names that are mentioned, and some of them are like, okay, I understand the on-court fit with a guy like Michael Porter Jr. I personally don't think that's necessarily the direction that they want to go, because I think there's too much volatility as far as his value is kind of high relative to what he'll actually bring in. And I don't know if he's a great fit with the current format as far as the team culture side of things. Yeah,
I think MPJ is going to be that name that we hear frequently over the next month. He fits at a position of need. His greatest skill set is his outside shooting, which if there's anywhere that this Pistons team can improve, it's going to be, putting somebody else in the starting lineup who can space the floor with Duncan, as opposed to him being the only one to space the floor. Agree, though, that I think like what they're building culture-wise, you can't bring in somebody who is going to change that, who's going to affect it negatively. MPJ seems to be like a guy who could solve a lot of problems on the court. Off the court, don't know enough about him. I know that there are things that have popped up with MPJ over the past few years, so I don't see that type of swing. I don't see a Lauri Markkanen type of swing, a Jaren Jackson Jr. kind of swing. They do have their trade exception still from this summer, so they do have a $14 million exception where they could absorb somebody who makes $14 million or less without having to give a player back. And one thing I actually learned from the Pistons Pulse from the Freep, they had Keith Smith on. And so I did know that any two-way player, so really this is for Dennis Jenkins, you can be active for 50 NBA games. He's already been active for 38. I think we played 38 games so far, and actually the 50th game is right on trade deadline day. So if there happens to be a move that Trajan makes, if it's a 2-for-1, a 3-for-2, something along those lines that opens up a roster spot, it also works out well to bring Dennis up at that same time and make him, a full-time player on the NBA roster instead of a two-way player. But I guess it's hard to go off of Trajan's history in Detroit, given that it hasn't been too long, but he hasn't taken a swing yet. I don't expect him to take one at the deadline, which is why I'm feeling more the bunt single route is what to be expected, whether that's, helping facilitate a trade. Like if Minnesota needs to get off some money, we could absorb Dante DiVincenzo. There's Sam Hauser in Boston. There's Max Christie in Dallas. I do think that with this bunt single, you just have to address the lack of three-point shooting that the team has. That has been my only, I guess, if you even want to call it an issue with the team. It's just I've pointed out in my articles on Detroit Bad Boys that just some spacing that gets a little bit wonky on the court with Asar and Duran sometimes in the same spot. But ultimately, I think they just need a little bit more shooting, and I don't think you need an MPJ or Lauri Markkanen kind of player to get that.
I agree with you. And there, you had suggested a player that I've always had my eye on. So I want to talk about him after the break and some of the iterations of how these things could look. But definitely the shooting will be the emphasis there. But we'll come back with Robbie Bettelon of Detroit Bad Boys after the break. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Robbie Bettelon of Detroit Bad Boys, having a good conversation about the Pistons and some of the iterations of trades, of how that could look, and some of the players. You hit on a few of the names that kind of gotten aggregated over time. I feel like we can't have a discussion about the Pistons and the trade deadline without having a Hauser reference. I think we're now, I don't remember how many, but like 4 for 4 on that with 4 different pundits on here. But it is a good name. I mean, it's one of those things marrying up the concepts that you're talking about. Boston could be one of those teams in a position to shed a player, shed some salary with where they're positioned right now. So he would be one of those guys that could be on the outside looking in. And they're one team, not that you can never really have too many shooters in the NBA, but they're a team that's a little stocked full of shooters. So you could see them maybe dealing somebody. But I'm glad you brought up the point about Jenkins, because I brought that up on the show before. That's one of the main reasons you really need a move, is because you have to clear a roster spot at this point to get him on full time. I wasn't aware of that exact timing, so that is good timing there. I knew about the 50-game thing. I didn't know it fell on the trade deadline, but there, it seems like there's some players too that, although I think people are generally pretty happy with how the team has played, obviously as a whole, and a lot of the individual players have played. It does seem like there's maybe a couple pieces that you could kind of get rid of and not have a substantial downturn too, because you do have some depth pieces that you talk about. Jenkins has kind of found money. Sasser's come back into the fray and looked pretty good. And so there's some players. That's kind of how I think about it sometimes, that I look at the Pistons side of things and rather than thinking, okay, what would we need to give up to get Markkanen or one of these big names? More so, it's okay, who could we package together that it's probably good to move on from them, and then what could we get in return as far as a salary and skill combo there. But I'm wondering if you have some players identified. I have a couple in mind.
So I think Danis may, like the whole Danis situation of him just like proving that he belongs on an NBA court this season may be what forces Trajan's hand a little earlier, because at the beginning of the season, I remember thinking like, you know, Ivy was coming back from injury. Sasser he was injured at the start of the season. We brought in LeVert, and we were kind of hoping, you know, he was going to handle like those backup guard minutes. But at the beginning of the year, it was like, man, this team kind of doesn't have a ton of depth in their guard spot. And now it's like, okay, I think you got too many guards at this point. I think Danis could handle backup point guard minutes. I think even Sasser, I wish he could play a little bit more, but I guess just with the rotation being that size, it's hard to fit him in there. But I feel like Tobias is always going to be thrown in to trades, you know, mock trades leading up to the trade deadline with his $26 million expiring contract. And I think Jaden Ivey, with just the plethora of guards, you're going to have to extend him this summer, so he is due a new contract. I just feel bad for him in this whole situation, to, you know, from the Monty thing to the broken leg. It's just like he's been trying to find his place these first 4 years of his NBA career, and I'm just wondering if maybe that's not in Detroit. So if you're looking at a package of Jaden Ivey, Tobias Harris, and a first, if you're trying to make a swing, you know, if you're going after like a Trey Murphy in New Orleans, that's going to take probably at least 2 picks. So the first two that come to my mind are Tobias and Jaden Ivey, but even then, like, I feel like Tobias has done a great job setting the culture. You know, one thing you and I can talk about is like, oh, Tobias makes sense as, you know, a money piece. Like, he makes this much money, but we have no idea the impact that he's had on those guys in the locker room. You know, is it possible that when he comes back from injury, like, he takes a bench role and then Isaiah Stewart starts at power forward? And if Stu can start shooting more threes, I think that would be fantastic for this team as a team that needs more three-point shooting. So I feel like the ones that we will see the most in trades will be Tobias and Jaden Ivey. But getting rid of Tobias, you have to bring in somebody to take his place. You know, like, if you get rid of Ivy, you could get whoever because you have depth there, but we do not have depth at power forward. So based on Tobias's ability to be a part of the culture, be that veteran on the team, and really he's still playing at a position of need, I don't know how likely he is to be moved, but he certainly has the contract that would be needed to make the money equal.
That was a great summary of the situation, and I have to say I agree with basically all of it, because it's just there's a lot of nuance to it, and I think you hit on a lot of the nuance of it. I'm basically on the same path with Jaden Ivey. I think he can be a very good player in the NBA. I don't have a lot of doubts about him. Yeah, he's come back and not really found his way into the rotation and been a little slow. I think there's a lot of ways to explain that away. He's coming off of back-to-back injuries. He didn't have camp with everybody. Now he's getting on what essentially is a moving train, one that has a whole cadence unto itself, and he's trying to get his part of it. Well, those guys aren't used to playing with him. They're not used to what spots on the floor he wants the ball and where he wants to rotate and all of those things, because even if they played with him before, it's a different iteration. There's a lot of new players. There's players that have grown. So I agree with you. I'd almost hate to see it. Also, Javen Hunter, his dad, is a friend of the show. So so there's that element too, because we have Javen on the show and he's a great guy. He played here in Michigan. He played basketball. He had Detroit Country Day when I was growing up here in Michigan, and he then became an NFL athlete, and that's a whole athlete riddled family here, but yeah, I like Jaden, but it's clearly not really a fit right now, both in kind of the play aspect, but you can see just from some of his body language things that he's just feeling it a little bit. It doesn't mean he's a malcontent or anything that where people kind of go to the extreme. It just means you can tell he's not really feeling the flow right now with the Pistons. And I think there's some teams, because this is the other element you have to consider with him, there are some teams that will want to take him on to potentially have the first chance to sign him, because I think that's the other part I'm worried about, that even though it hasn't gone great here in Detroit, his market still seems to be pretty high. Now, that's a lot of conjecture, but it seems like there's a lot of teams that do see the potential in him and say, okay, let's have him as our primary guy, our primary ball handler. I think that'll look pretty good. And so when that's looming too, and you're having to focus on re-signing a few guys, you've got Duran as well in the same class, then you've got Thompson next. So if there's somebody that kind of has to be left out of a chair with the whole musical chairs game, then maybe it's Jaden that has kind of worked his way into that situation, really by no fault of himself. It's more the injuries and some of the coaching fit issues, especially with Williams.
I agree. It's kind of like a timing thing with Jaden. Like, by default, he just kind of, from a timing standpoint, has fallen into that, like, well, you know, he's coming off a couple injuries. He doesn't seem to have the burst that he used to have at Purdue or his rookie year. And right now he's still finding his place in the rotation, whatever that is. And I thought as he was coming back from injury, like, it was weird not knowing if he was on a minutes restriction or if he wasn't, because sometimes he wasn't getting over 15 minutes. It's gone up a little bit more recently, but yes, to no fault of Ivy's, like, it's just by default he has kind of become like, hey, if you're going to pay Duren, it's going to make it harder to pay Ivy. And if you plan on paying Asar the next year and then Ron Holland the year after that, I did not think, you brought up a good point about him still being a restricted free agent. If somebody is comfortable paying him this summer, you can go ahead and trade for him at the deadline, get a head start on getting him in the organization, on the court with, his new players. If there is a team out there that's, looking to take a flyer on him. I will say, so in one of my articles, I wrote that I felt that the power forward in between Asar and Duren essentially needs to be a Duncan Robinson kind of player, right? Like somebody who's, 80% of their shots are threes. And so I was looking for types of players that are doing that at the power forward position. And I found somebody that actually played on the Pistons before, who's making quite a bit of money right now on his current team. But you could trade Tobias straight up for him, and maybe they would be willing to listen, given he's got 2 or 3 more years on his contract. Any ideas, Ryan, of who I'm talking about?
You're putting me on the spot here. I'm trying to run through some of the past.
Not even my show, but I'm going to.
I love it.
The question.
No, I love it because I could see where you were going with the question. If I had your articles up. So if I was, but I moved to a different browser here, moved to a different tab, so I can't cheat that way. But I'm running through. When you said a decent amount of money, that excluded a couple of the guys that I was thinking of, because they have had some guys that have filled that role as far as a shooter. They're not necessarily that same as a Duncan Robinson, because you've got, like, say, a Trey Lyles. That's definitely not who you're talking about. You've got Jeremy Grant with the Blazers, but I don't think either of those guys is a fit. So you're going to have to help me out here. This was good. I can those are my two guesses, and that's not it. So you got to help me.
You're right. It is it. It was Jeremy.
Was it Grant? Okay, I wasn't sure. Yeah. I knew it wasn't Lyles, but the Grant was where my mind went after that. But I wasn't sure because he's been kind of vacillating back and forth in that Blazers lineup. It's weird. He kind of starts, kind of doesn't. Right? Yeah, because they had the presence of Avdia there, where now that's changed a lot of things, I think, for them, and obviously now they have, unfortunately, this is a former Piston from the Going to Work group, but they have the uncertainty at the coaching position there with Billups having to take the time off now, but that's I do see the fit there. We got to take one more break here, but I want to come back and talk about that, because we still didn't get to the name that I saw you have on your X. I didn't see that article about Grant, but I'm glad I guessed it, though. I'm glad I thought my way through it. But there's another younger guy that I feel like may be in the mix there for a shooting big man. So we'll talk about that with Robbie after the break. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM.
From the Scully Statewide Moving Studios.
Country with a twist. Jethro FM. 1530 AM. WYGR Wyoming Grand Rapids. 94.9 FM Grand Rapids. 99.5 FM Lowell. And Jethro South. 980 AM WAKV Otsego Plainwell. 98.9 FM Otsego. And 105.1 FM Kalamazoo. Available worldwide at jethro.fm.
Coming back here for a third segment with Robbie Bettelon, having a good conversation with him. We've got a lot to tie up in 8 minutes here, because I've had notes written down, and there's a few things, so we're probably not going to get to everything, but we'll also try to have Robbie back on the show, because he's been a great guest here. But I like the Grant thing. That I wanted to get to the name that I've been teasing here, because it's a young guy. It would kind of fit at least the kind of youth arc of the Pistons, and I think skill set wise it would fit well. Don't have a feel for his personality as far as the culture goes. He's more of the European background, but Santi Aldama was the guy that I saw on your X there, and you're the only one that I've seen bring that one up. That's a unique one, and I liked that one because I've wanted the Pistons to target him for a while, because we knew this was a need even at the beginning of the season and before the season, headed into the season. I thought they would address it a little bit more. Like you said, Tobias Harris has been great for the team. He's Uncle T. He's helped the team out a lot, but I do think that between the fact that he's got that expiring deal, they've got some guys that may fill a version of that role, the starting 4 position. Do you try to beef up the shooting there? Because I was hoping his shooting would improve as he got older, because that happens sometimes. Al Horford comes to mind, where it's like, where did this 3-point shot come from? But he adjusted to the game. Lopez is obviously an extreme example, but Harris's shot has just stayed so flat that there just hasn't been a lot of improvement as far as the percentages go. That's not to knock him, because he's been a great contributor, but it's more back to the basket, mid-range kind of stuff. So I think eventually it makes sense with a lot of the pieces that you're keeping, Thompson, Holland, Stewart, that you replace that position, that role, with a guy that's truly more of a stretch big in the composition that we're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's what I think that's this team's missing piece. Like, I like Tobias. I think he's been great at power forward for us, but he's not, this knockdown shooter that teams fear, whereas Duncan, for example, I had to look it up over the break. He's shooting 7 3-pointers a game and shooting them at 39%. So the reason why I thought Jeremy will have his own pros and cons as well, but Jeremy's shooting 39% on 6.5 per game. So, it doesn't have to be Jeremy Grant, because of course you're going to have injury issues and the money and all that. But a guy like Santi Aldama, a guy like, I've seen Bobby Portis come up frequently, just somebody whose main role is like spread the floor, stand in the corner while Cade and Duran run their pick and roll. And when the defense collapses, Cade will find you, Asar will find you, and we just need you, to let it fly from 3. Because right now I feel like the only one in the starting lineup that is really a feared shooter is Duncan. And I know that we've talked about playoffs, defensively, but I do worry offensively. Like, is the opposing team going to put a center on Asar and leave Asar wide open? Like, are they just going to live with Asar shooting jump shots? And in that case, like, you've got to have more shooting on the floor. You've got to get creative in your ways to get Asar downhill, but you got to have the spacing to do it as well. So I feel like that's where the bunt single, if we're not going, an MPJ route, it's like, get somebody who's really good at standing in the corner, letting their teammates do their thing, and when they're open, they catch, they shoot, they let it fly. So I think any of those tall kind of stretch bigs that can kind of play fringe starter, fringe bench minutes is probably the ultimate way to go.
I like some of those names that you talked about. I also like that I teased the fact that people get into the conversation too much about trades with the Pistons, and now we've been talking about it for a while, but it's a good conversation, and these are some good names here, because there's a couple I want to highlight out of what you mentioned, because I want to go back to one from the previous segment and hit a couple there. We talked about Aldama. I think there's 3 different lanes here that we've kind of highlighted a little bit. We know what they need, the stretch big. Aldama's kind of the young option that can grow with the team long term. There's another in that category that would be a bigger swing. You mentioned him the previous segment. To me, I would put this guy priority-wise above a Michael Porter Jr. because I think he's a better fit for the culture of the team potentially, and management has some experience with him. But I would love to have Murphy on this team. I think between his defense and his shooting and his team-friendly contract, all of those things would work out very well. And if you could package, I'd hate to see him go, as I mentioned, Ivy Detroit and Harris and attach a couple picks to that, I would do that in a heartbeat. I think that would be kind of that subtle move that gets them over the top for the long term. Who knows what happens this year, but it's a guy on their same arc. The name that you mentioned, though, is one that I've thought of, and I've brought it up to people, and they've said, well, aren't you worried about him fighting with Beef Stew? But I don't know if you're familiar with the movie series The Mighty Ducks, but they had the Bash Brothers. Yeah. So they had the Bash Brothers where they disagreed when they were on opposite teams, but when they got on the same team, then they were like an unstoppable force. To me, that is what's going to happen if you pair Beef Stew with Bobby Portis.
Yeah. Nobody's going to want to go up against that front court there, and it is funny considering they got in a little spat at some point this season, but hey, maybe at some point we'll see somebody put their hockey stick down, little knuckle puck action from 90 feet for a three-pointer. Maybe we'll see that this year.
Well, you don't. I love the knuckle puck reference. You don't have room for him. But if you're going to go that route, I want to add James Johnson into the mix, and then nobody will fight us ever.
Yeah. Nobody will want to play Detroit at all. Nobody will want to set foot on the court. And luckily, we'll just, one enforcer after the other at that point.
We'll just have a bunch of forfeits, and then we'll get to the playoffs that way. Great discussion. I like that we highlighted kind of some different routes that they could go. I want to have you back on as the season progresses here to talk more about the team, because, again, they're fun to talk about, and it was great coverage. But make sure to tell the people where they can follow you here in the meantime.
Yes, I am on Twitter and Blue Sky. My handle is BobbyBucket313. Try to stay looped into all of Detroit sports, but really it's the Pistons right now. And then all of our writing, we got a good group of guys at DetroitBadBoys.com, constantly putting out previews, recaps, and what Ryan referred to earlier, my Under the Hood article that I've been doing has all the Motor City puns in it, doing a little film breakdown after each game. So you can find all my stuff there.
Yeah, I love that one. And like you said, there's a lot of great writers there. We've had Sean Corp on the show. We've had Brady Fredrickson. We're going to have others. We're going to have Brennan Sims on the show. So we're going to prominently feature the Detroit Bad Boys crew, because they always bring
awesome.
But we'll definitely be sure to have you back too, and appreciate the time. And now it's getting close to tea time here.
Yeah, you're right. Chamomile tea time. Yeah, I would love to come back anytime, Ryan. It was a great conversation, and I guess I'll have to come back after the deadline. We're going to have to see if our predictions were right or not.
My post-deadline run is going to be very busy. I feel like I'm going to just have to do it. Usually my cadence on the show is Pistons, Red Wings, and then a third segment where we rotate some coverage, Michigan, University of Michigan basketball, Michigan State basketball. But it's going to have to be all Pistons after the break, because I've got so many setups with different people that have been on the show and so many trade conversations going. But yeah, it's going to be fun. It's nice. They're in a good position. That's the main thing that we highlighted. You talk about the trade exception, which is good, and they're in good position as far as they probably have a few players that they can get rid of and then use that to consolidate and open up a spot for Danis. So we'll definitely have you on after that, and we look forward to it. Appreciate you joining the show.
Thanks, Ryan. Have a good one, man.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Thanks to Robbie Bettelton. Appreciate him joining the show. Good conversation about the Pistons. We're going to turn our attention to hockey, so we had a hard time booking a Red Wings pundit today because it's the Sergei Fedorov retirement ceremony. So pretty much all of our writers and people that cover things are doing that here. But he just texted me. He's one of my favorite hockey guests. He's not Red Wings specific, but Erik Westrum, writer, former hockey player. He played in the Olympics. He's got a lot of great experience, and he's more kind of in the motivational speaking lane here. But We'll talk some hockey. We'll talk about his books. We'll talk about what he's doing. And he just texted me that he's ready whenever. So we're taking a break and calling him during the break here. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Happy to bring on this next guest. I've been wanting to get him on in our hockey slot, weekly hockey slot. We've been shuffling through because of all the things going on with the Red Wings and then the historic success of the Griffins. We've had that content here, but I told the crowd, Erik, that when I reached out to some of our Red Wings pundits to come on today, they're basically all in Detroit today because it's the retirement ceremony of Sergei Fedorov. So I'm glad to have you on. We'll be talking some hockey and your career, but that's where all the Detroit pundits are today.
I love it. I remember watching and playing against Sergei Fedorov, one of the best skaters, and I'm sure we'll hit on the Wild. It reminds me Quinn Hughes. I got to watch him Saturday night.
That's a name that I think some of the Red Wings fans were hoping that he would be in a Red Wings jersey versus a Wild jersey here, because of that. We were talking about this in the last segment, talking about the Pistons, but you always want to take the big swing if you're a fan. As a team, that's harder to do, because you'd be a good one to talk to about this, Erik, because you've been in locker rooms, you've done a lot of consulting on the business side of things, you've been in a lot of these different spaces, and culture is so key, whether you're talking about a business or a team. And so I preach that a lot on the show, because it's easy as a fan to say, hey, I want Quinn Hughes on my team, or I want the next big player. But there's a lot of things that the teams have to factor in that in your dream booking of that scenario, you don't have to factor in. You don't have to factor in how the money works with the rest of the team and limiting the budget for re-signing players or acquiring players later. You don't have to work out what it'll look like on the lines or the different pairings if it's defensemen. And you also don't have to work out what that looks like in the culture. I'm not saying that with Hughes. He's not. Yep. That's not a take on him. He, by all accounts, seems to be a good culture guy, but that is something that you have to consider when you get a new player into that locker room environment, that it's kind of like, I said this in the last segment, it's kind of like getting on a moving train. You don't know exactly how that's going to work.
Oh, for sure. And I did think Quinn might have ended up in Detroit, obviously, where he wanted to be in the Midwest, close to home and everything else. So obviously that was a potential destination. I think when you look at it too, like you mentioned, just from business and sports, the biggest thing, when I looked at that trade is, what are you giving up for him? But then what do you get? Right. And I think that's the thing. So many people focus on what are you giving up as an organization? It was 3 first-round picks, right, in Zeev Bullion, and you had the other 2 guys, Rossi and Liam, and then you also had another first-round pick, I think, coming up this year. But with what he brings, again, I watched him Saturday and kind of put a spotlight on him. My dad was there, and my 2 sons as well. My dad was a scout in the NHL for 20-plus years, and we both said, it's worth the trade. He is such a difference maker. He logs 30 minutes of ice. And you go to culture, he knew, he, as in Billy G, knew what he was getting because of his connection with Team USA. And obviously he's known Quinn, over the years. So I think that's the other part too, that some people, like you said, is what is his culture fit? But, with Brock Faber, who his D partner was for the majority of the night outside of the power play, and some of those other guys, he fits in anywhere, right? He's a very humble person. He's an excellent hockey player, and he's an excellent teammate. So I think they got, in my opinion, you'll see after a year and a half, and why do I say that? If he re-signs, it's a no-brainer, one of the best trades, I think, in NHL history. If he does not re-sign, and him and his brothers end up in Detroit or New Jersey, they're actually playing New Jersey right now here in Minnesota. So it'll be interesting. But I think to your point, that culture fit is big, but what are you getting as far as an asset? And it's the same thing in business, right? You got to spend money sometimes to make money. And, for them, they spent money and assets to, hopefully bring a Stanley Cup back home to Minnesota, because it hasn't been done.
It's a great point, and maybe that's why I look at things the way that I do because I am an entrepreneur and have a business on the side, have a couple businesses, but it's all about the value to me when you acquire a player. You've got to factor in all the culture stuff. That's part of the value, but it's what are you giving up? Because this happens a lot in sports in general. There will be a guy that is considered a bust because he was a high pick and maybe for that first team he didn't work out. Then he goes to another team and it's like, well, if you didn't give up a lot to get him, then he's a good value for your team if he's getting back anywhere near what that initial projection was. It's the first team that maybe missed out on that value. But yeah, you hit the nail on the head with Hughes. I think Detroit would have been happy to acquire him. The part that I think they were having a hard time with is they've been stocking the cupboards well with these young players. Yzerman's gotten them back with having a lot of youth in the organization, and we're seeing that with the Griffins level here in Grand Rapids, but everywhere else, the main roster, they've had some young guys called up. But I think it would have been tough because it sounded like they wanted basically 2 or 3 guys that were ready now, like a Simon Edvinson, who is a consistent player, plays every night there, one of the key defenders. Marco Casper having a little bit of a down second year, but huge trajectory there, or a Nate Danielson that just got pulled up. It sounded like at least 2 of those 3 guys, and then probably multiple picks. That would have been hard to give up because even though you're giving it up for a player that's probably better than the sum of those parts, you're now having holes to fill there, and you're creating more holes. So it would have been nice if they could have done it where they could have worked it more with the developmental system and not necessarily create holes at the Red Wings level. But for a player like Hughes, that's almost impossible to do because he's worth the value of like you said, these multiple pieces that are valuable in themselves, but not nearly as valuable as one of the most valuable players in the NHL as a whole.
Oh, for sure. Well, and like you said, even in entrepreneurship and business, right, you really don't know. You got to put a lot into it, and you don't know what you're going to get out for probably 18 months, right? So it's similar in that situation. And I speak very highly of Stevie Y. I had the chance to play against him, but just even watch, what he did in Tampa and just his demeanor. He's a smart guy, and I think, with what they're building there, just watching some of those games, like you said, the Griffins. I remember playing against the Griffins when I was in the minors and, spending time in Grand Rapids. And I'm sure you still have, what was it called, the Bob?
Yep.
Where you'd go to eat food and hang out at the local establishment with the Griffins and our team when we'd come in. But I think with what he's building, it's hard to disassemble that because you're not really giving it the opportunity to come to fruition. And I think that's probably also in the back of his mind. We've put time to build this around certain players, but then also certain pieces that really haven't come to fruition or had the time to kind of marinate in the minors, and or what are some of the draft picks that he'll be picking up this summer too. So I think it's a hard decision, but I think Minnesota's in a different position because, Kaprizov is locked up. They have 2 really good goaltenders right now. And then adding Quinn Hughes kind of is, it's now or never. The next 2 years is kind of their window, depending on, where some of those other pieces go. And I think Billy G looks at it as, this is my opportunity. And it's also a job thing too, right? When you're, in that position, you got to make the moves when you can. And I think after, with the Parisi Suter thing coming off of the books, they had some room to work with. And I think, like I said, right now, I think it's a great trade. In 18 months, if he signs, it's probably one of the best trades ever. Just the value he adds, and reminds me of last year. I went to a game and Kaprizov was out, and the dynamic in that game just totally shifted. It's the same thing with him. You have Kaprizov, a bunch of other really good players, and 2 really good goaltenders. So I think it's a good move for the Minnesota Wild. But to your point, we'll see where that kind of shakes out.
It's a great point about kind of how hot the seat is too for the GM, because even though Yzerman has a sterling reputation on the ice and then off the ice too, I mean, he built up a whole career as a GM in Tampa, built a great team there, but it's kind of ironic. It's hard for some of these guys. It's happened on the baseball side. Alan Trammell had a great Hall of Fame career here for the Tigers. Then he came in as the manager, and that was kind of mixed reviews. That's happening a little bit Yzerman, where I think from the fan perspective, his seat is getting a little hot, which is kind of ironic because he's doing that long build. He's getting that cupboard stacked. And I think that's why I've been trying to preach patience some on this show, because it's, like you said, it's all about windows. And I think if you try to do that patient long build, you get a longer window, but it also takes longer to get there. Whereas if you see maybe, hey, we can strike here, we can put ourselves above the pack. A lot of hockey right now is very grouped together. There's a decent amount of parity. So if we can add a guy like Hughes and take 2 shots at this in the next 2 years, then let's do it. And I agree with you that it's a good attempt at it there. But I know people were a little disappointed that they didn't take that big swing, but they've still got the trade deadline looming. They've got a lot of space. They've got the components to potentially make a move. But it is hard to be patient. As a fan, you want things to move at light speed, and it just doesn't always happen depending on what kind of build you're doing as a GM and as an organization.
Yeah, and the other part too is with the Olympics coming up, I think that was the other reason why Minnesota probably made the move sooner, along with only having a year and a half on the contract. And if you look at pivoting into the Olympics, U.S., Canada, and some of those other teams, I mean, that takes a toll on those guys. You look at last year with the, 4 nations, that's a huge, game changer too on why and how some of these GMs will make decisions, because the extra mileage that's going to go on, a Quinn Hughes, a Brock Faber, a Matt Boldy, a lot of those guys, it's a hard turnaround, especially in that space, because you saw last year they played just as hard, if not harder, in those games. And I think that will come into play with that trade deadline. Like you said, there's some teams that I think will make some bigger moves, right? Minnesota, I think potentially is looking at making one more, that could help them get over the hump. Because you got to remember right now, the top 3 teams, when I last looked, it was Colorado, Dallas, and Minnesota. And they're all in the same spot, right? They got to play each other in, either game 1 or game 2. And that's a hard division to come out of.
Oh, exactly. And you bring up a good point about the Olympics, because I know that there was a couple Red Wings that felt like they were close and maybe missed out, but I can't say, I'm disappointed for those guys because I know that's a huge honor. You did it. You can speak to how big of an honor it is, but from the team standpoint, if you're rooting for that team, it does take a toll on these guys, especially if they're a little bit older. And so when you're talking about a Kane or a DeBrincat and they're wanting to go to the Olympics, I don't know if that's mileage that I want on my players if I'm part of the Red Wings, even though it's an individual honor and you get to play for your home country. And like I said, you can speak to all that, but it is a double-edged sword with the timing of everything.
Oh, for sure. And like you just said, with that injury too, right? I think that's one of the biggest pieces. I mean, you look at, Matthew Tkachuk. I mean, he made it out of there towards the end of the year and they won the Stanley Cup, right? But again, he was out this whole part of the season and that injury did occur, primarily when he was in the 4 nations. So you see that, and then you also pivot to what the players want to do too. And I think it's an honor, obviously, being able to wear the U.S. sweater when I was playing when I was younger, and then men's national team, and winning a bronze medal was really, really neat. And at the same time, I think when you're a U.S. born player, the Stanley Cup is probably just as high up there, if not higher. Whereas a lot of international teams, that's on their radar since they, can walk. So it's a different dynamic, and we'll see what happens. Not only with the Olympics, but also the end of the season. Once they come back, there's going to be a huge push for a lot of teams.
Definitely, it is a very tight race right now at this point in the season, and I think the Olympic break and some of the other things could kind of have some teams breaking out from the pack. But yeah, that was good hockey talk there. I want to talk about some of the things you've been doing with your post hockey career, because I was comparing it in my mind during the break with a segment that we're doing on our football show on Thursdays, where we're starting a series where we basically do an interview series where we talk about kind of the person's career, what led up to that, and then post post career, because it's always interesting to see you guys you get so focused on being the top 0.1% of this particular field, but then you have a lot of years potentially to work after that if you want to. You're not in the position that you necessarily have to for some folks, depending on what they make over the course of their career. But your career choice has been interesting afterwards. You've been doing a lot of great work, so we want to highlight that after the break. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Erik Westrum, former hockey player and current author. Erik, I do try to follow all of your books, but I hadn't really checked in since our last interview, and then I went and said, okay, let me see if he's released anything since the last interview. I want to catch up on his books so I can highlight him on the show. And you've written 4 books since then. You're not taking a lot of time off here post-career.
No, I think, and I appreciate you following it and appreciate the support as usual, Ryan, and looking forward to seeing you here next month. Yeah, for me, I think the biggest part, what I realized is book number 1, right, it was obviously a huge undertaking just to figure out, how do you do it? What do you do? Who do you trust? And once that happened, book number 2, took a little bit of time, but it was a lot easier. And I started to realize, just the information, knowledge, and kind of the process that I've gone through. I want to share that. I want to impact, inspire, and influence other people. So as you look, right, I have a book I wrote with, my 5-year-old, around that space. And then I also wrote a couple more, in the fatherhood space, the leadership space, coaching, leading with questions. So a lot of it, honestly, is, a lot of the coaching that I'm doing, it just spurs ideas. And then also when I see that impact and influence turn into something, it inspires me to write a book, and I'll have a couple more here coming out as well. So it's been a fun process, and it's been enjoyable just to see the results of other people who implement.
That's one of the things that I like about your books. There's some differences. You mentioned the one that's kind of the most different, which we'll highlight first, which is Super Evie to the Rescue, the one that you wrote with your daughter. But you have a good format to your books, because it's basically a lot of good information about different subject matters, like you're talking about leadership, fatherhood. But there's a lot of actionable items in there, and then I think it looks like then that leads to some support on the back end for some of the concepts, as far as then you get, I don't know if it'd be referred to like a mastermind group or a coaching group afterwards, where then they get additional support and consultation there, at least with some of the concepts.
Yeah, and that's exactly it, right? Because a lot of people, I always put it in simple terms, right? Some people can go and, work out on their own. And then people need a book or a video to be able to implement. And then others need a group, and others need individual coaching. So that's kind of how I've modeled that is, okay, here's the information. And we know, 97 to 99% of people aren't going to implement and execute consistently, and they're going to need something extra. So that's where I try to make sure that I'm a resource, whether that's one-on-one coaching or doing some group stuff. But I think that's what I found not only worked in my own life, but that's what people were looking for, because we all need accountability. We all need a plan. We all need goals, and we all need direction. And it's just a matter of how can you execute on it, because life is busy. Life is, getting thrown at us, whether you have kids or work or different things that come to you. And to be able to process that, like you said, is to take action. That's one of the number one things that I continue to stress for sure.
I love that about your books. The one that threw me for a loop, and I bought the hard copy. Normally I buy them on Kindle or Audible if they're that way, because Audible is easier to take in while I'm doing other things. But Super Evie to the Rescue was the different one. There's not a coaching group based on that or anything, but you wrote that with your daughter, which I thought was cool, and it looks like that was to raise some funds for, is that for your nonprofit, the mental health nonprofit?
Yeah. So we were laying in bed one night reading books, and she's like, hey, I want to write a book. So she came up with the concept and everything. Obviously I tweaked it a little bit so it had better flow. And, I'm like, you know what? You don't need someone else to be your superhero necessarily. A lot of times we have it within us, but it's really hard to find that within us. So that was the book's direction towards the end. And yes, to your point, it's around mental health awareness. So it's called Let's Make the Shift I did a 50K in September, an ultra marathon to raise money towards that. And the book, all the proceeds go towards that. And we'll be writing a second book that'll be coming out before Easter. It's called Floppy and Evie, Going to Easter Egg Hunt. So another fun book that my daughter, she loves to write. She loves to be creative. So it's been kind of a gift to be able to work on that together, bring that to fruition. And then we usually do a little reading with her school and give out a bunch of books to kids. So it's been fun.
That's cool. Yeah, kudos to you on doing all that. It also speaks to one of your other books, because I've got each of them written down, the new ones, and I want to mention each of them. It's like you're executing the tenets of what you recommend in Fatherhood by Design, because you're working with your daughter, more engaging on that. And I thought I'm not a father, but I thought there were a lot of good pieces of advice in that one, kind of consolidating and simplifying what can be a difficult concept for a lot of folks.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the books, like, it's interesting because the new book I'm going to be coming out with is called Relationship Seller. So it's just the difference between, transactional and relationship selling, but it's also some of the same concepts, like you're talking, whether it's being a father, whether it's being a friend, whether it's being, just an employee or an employer. I think all of those principles apply. But the neat thing is you can attract to different people, whether it's looking to be a father or to be, in different space. And that's, ironically, it was kind of cool to connect with you because I'll be coming to Grand Rapids for an event in February. And the sole reason that we connected was around fatherhood and specifically being a girl dad. And I think that was one of the coolest parts. And it's going to be a fun experience to be able to be up there and be around people, not only in, the fatherhood space, but also just the space of sports, connecting, and also being able to grow as individuals and as people. So that was, like I said, that's kind of cool. And I'm hoping that we can connect when I am up there too.
Definitely. I'm planning on it, and I'm going to the expo. I want to give people the information on that. It's the Women's Sports and Health Expo. It's February 21 at DeVos Place. It's an all-day event. Erik will be one of the speakers. There's a lot of great other speakers and vendors and sponsors that are in the mix there, so be sure to check that out. It's wshexpo.com. But, yeah, I already got my ticket because you sent that to me. Want to meet up separately from that, but it looks like it's going to be a great event and something worth going to from multiple aspects, kind of with my radio hat as far as potential guests and content there, because it's sports oriented. And I was talking about this actually before this show because we had Emily Waldon, who covers the Whitecaps here in town, but I'm always venturing to try to get more women from sports on the show, more representation for women. So that's my mom just raised her arms at that. She's in studio every day, every show here, but always trying to do that. And that's what it looks like this expo is trying to do, representation and guiding younger women that are wanting to venture into sports. And it's cool that you're dedicating some time to that, because I'm sure you have a busy schedule and have to work out which events you want to speak at. But like you said, being a girl dad and everything, I'm sure that was a big motivation for you.
Yeah, it's a passion of mine too. And it's ironic, we're starting to write a book around that space. So it's going to be called Her First Hero, which will be coming out probably in a month. We're going to release it right around that time. But I think for me, to your point, it's just women in sports, especially having two daughters. I actually coach my daughter's 6th grade basketball team, it's a different dynamic coaching females versus males. And I think it's the same thing as being a parent, right? Whether, it's a daughter or a son. And I think one of the things I do believe in and see is, the father's impact is so key in how you treat your daughter, how you treat your wife, how you treat others, because that's going to trickle down effect also into sports. So as coaches, how do we treat young men and young women and the equality there to give them an opportunity, a chance, and to be able to coach them up? Because I think that's one of the biggest things that we can do, in our world today, is be able to not only coach them as athletes, but also coach them, as women as they grow into their life, whether it's in high school, whether it's in college, whether it's in sports, or just in life in general. So I'm really excited to be a part of that event. I'll be flying in Friday and then Saturday, be there all day doing the event. And then I'm actually going to do a breakout room for some of the people who want more of an intimate connection. I don't know if they're going to release it before or after or during, but that's one of the things. I'll be giving out one of my books to everybody who comes to that breakout room just to dig into some questions and, comments, answers, and just kind of pick each other's brain, almost like a mini 45-minute mastermind to be able to kind of take it to the next level. And like we always talk about, the 1% impact.
Nice. That's a great benefit there, and hopefully people will hear this and come out. It'll be on podcast too, promoting it. But you talked about coaching. That was one of the other books that I saw was a new one and read that. It was the Coaching Multiplier. I thought that was a great one for multiple facets. No matter, it's not just about sports, it's about business, it's about all aspects with family, like you're talking about. I thought that was a very good one in that structure of, hey, here's how to do it, here's how to apply it. And I liked this spoke to me as somebody that's in the Detroit sports market. Coaching with Grace and Grit, I felt like that was speaking to the Detroit market specifically.
I love it. I think it's speaking to a lot of markets.
Definitely.
Right. Especially in sports but like you said, in life too. And I think that's one of the things, right now I'm actually reading a lot of my books in the morning. I try to read 10 to 15 pages, of my own book, just because it reminds me of what I preach and how I want to impact, inspire, and influence people. And it's funny, if I can tell, obviously I'm speaking to myself, but I can hear myself in my daily conversations continue to try to echo that and reinforce it. And I think that's a huge thing, for me as a Christian too, to be able to disciple people through the process and then also pass that forward. It's the same thing in coaching, the impact you can make. I mean, we can probably all go through coaches that made an impact on us. And I took one or two of those different aspects into my life, whether it's as a dad, as a friend, or as a coach. And that's what, I try to teach people is, we have the opportunity to multiply, and how can we do that in today's world?
It's great to hear that you're reading your own books too, because I mean, that's how you get better. That's how you lead other people. You've got to raise your own level before you can raise the level of the people around you. And you've obviously done that through the multiple careers and all the learning that you've done. And then, research for your books and getting those concepts down. And that's where I want to make sure to get in the last one too, because this is the one that probably spoke to me the most, because as a radio host and then entrepreneur that is the leader of that business, lead with questions. I thought that was a great one because you have the discovery concept there. And that's when I read the discovery concept, I was like, oh, that's kind of how I interview on the show. That's kind of unknowingly how, because obviously for the show, I'm asking a lot of questions and you want to lead into different subject matters. And these segments are all about getting the great information out there from you and the other guests. And so that one spoke to me on the business side and the sports radio side.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Ryan, it's leading with questions, right? And discovery is a lot of times we'll ask one question, but the truth, right, or the feelings or the emotions or the concepts usually come from a second or third level question. So the easiest way is if I were to approach you and say, hey, how are you? You're going to say good. The majority of people are. And if I ask you a second level question, you might say, yeah, well, actually this morning X, Y, and Z happened. And then I might ask a third level question, right? Hey, how did that make you feel, or how did it impact your day? And then now the real root is going to come out. You know what? It actually made me do this or that. And then that's where you start to have that deeper connection. Instead of a transactional relationship, it becomes, relational. And I think that's where a lot of that came from, is I was so quick to ask one question and then go into problem solver, I want to fix it for you mode, instead of asking that first, second, third, fourth, fifth level question to get to the real connection. And I think it makes such a difference. And honestly, I learned a lot of that through raising kids, in my marriage, and then obviously in hockey, where, you usually don't go further than one question because you don't want to be emotional or vulnerable. And I learned sometimes the hard way in that and in work to be able to transform that and start to lead with more questions and dig a little bit deeper.
It's a great point, and I think it's a good reminder for the current times too, because I think we can be too quick. It's the whole concept of two ears and one mouth. The idea that you should be listening twice as much as you're talking, and you do that by questions. You don't do that by kind of running somebody over with your opinion or what have you. And the how are you one is a great point, because it's I found that a lot, because I'll even go sometimes I'll say, well, how are you? And they'll say, oh yeah, I'm fine. And I'll say, no, I actually want to know how you are. Like, I'm not just asking as a pleasantry. I would like to find out. I would like to find that out. I don't just want to ask, but it's call and response. We're all programmed to do that. And like you said, you got to dive a little bit deeper. So I thought that was a great concept, and definitely want to recommend all of those books. We'll put them out on social media here and put the information out there so people can read those. I enjoyed reading those, and you're going at a pace, Erik, where you're writing so much that I can't even keep up. Now you're putting out other books. I'm going to have to put those in my Kindle or Audible or wherever they're housed here. But it's great stuff. I appreciate you joining the show to talk about it. And I want to make sure to give you the opportunity to tell people where they can follow you here with all the different endeavors.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Ryan. And I'll tell you, on those books, the reason they do come out quicker is because they're easy to read, right? Sports guys like quick, easy, get to the point, get the information, process it, and implement and execute. But yeah, different places. Obviously, Amazon's the easiest place to buy the book. ErikWestrum.com. So ErikWestrum.com. That's probably the easiest way, because I have all my social handles on there. I have all the bonus gifts that I can give out, whether you bought the book or not. If you go to the bonuses, just put a little note that you heard about it through the show, and I'll make sure I send all that information out. It's got my charity on there, so made it really easy to consolidate under ErikWestrum.com, as long as you spell my name correctly. I think it's the first or second thing that pops up after my Wikipedia page. So appreciate you having me, and yeah, I'm excited to be out in Grand Rapids and not only connect at the event, but hopefully have a deeper conversation. And tell you this much, you're in the 1% of people who actually ask that second layer question. And you probably don't even know that you've changed people's lives along that. So that's awesome to hear.
Well, I have read the 1% impact, so I'm trying to follow that tenet here. But yeah, there's a lot of great information there, so be sure to follow that website. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing you here. Hopefully, we can connect maybe on that Friday, depending on when you come in, or at least on that Saturday. But looking forward to the event. We'll be promoting that here, and looking forward to seeing you. And appreciate you coming on the show and giving all the great information. And we'll look forward to having you back on the show at some point as well.
Appreciate you, Ryan. Have a great rest of the night and enjoy the week.
Thanks. You too. Take care, Erik.
Yep. Bye.
Thanks to Erik Westrum. Great stuff there. A lot of great books. I highlighted the ones since the last show, but he also has the 1% Impact and a couple others that you would be able to see on his website or on Amazon there. They're all available there. That's actually how Erik and I met, was we went through a group that helped us with our books. And so that's how we initially met. So great author there. We'll look forward to having him back on. Want to thank Robbie Bettelon and Emily Waldon too. And might as well take a moment to thank all of our sponsors here: Mary Freebed, Collectible Insurance Services, Eric Hall Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Calder Financial, Grand Management Group, Right End Investments, Encore Business Group, Jim Hegland of JH Realty, Williams Chiropractic, and iCore.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh.